Welcome to the Profitable Farmer podcast, where we share stories and tips to help you run a better farming business and create your very own freedom farm. If you're looking to work smarter and not harder in your farm business, welcome. You're in the right place. G'day everyone. In this interview, I'm delighted to interview Jim Geltch. So Jim has been CEO to Nuffield Australia 2005 to 2016, and at the same time CEO of Nuffield International 2008 to 2020. And as he finished his tenure in that leadership role with Nuffield, the incoming international chair said this of Jim: Jim epitomises what Nuffield stands for, with a passion, work ethic and determination to see this organisation to develop, to offer even more young agriculturalists the opportunity to travel the world studying a topic of relevance to their industry. He's always been driven to develop and inspire leadership in individuals in agriculture and sees Nuffield as a highly regarded network of leaders whose insight is sought around the world. He leaves an indelible impact on all Nuffield scholars he has fostered over the past 15 years. He's a pretty remarkable individual who's made an incredible impact on the Nuffield organisation, but absolutely beyond that in our industry. Recently, Jim's been awarded an Australian Order for Services to Agriculture, and also the Rabobank Leadership Award, recognising the fundamentally important role he's played developing upcoming leadership in the Australian and New Zealand food, fibre and agribusiness sector. So congratulations, Jim. It's my hope in this podcast that we honour Jim for his impact, but also that we advocate for the great work that Nuffield Farming Scholarship Program and the Nuffield Foundation contributes locally and globally to agriculture. It is an incredible and unique organisation creating our next generation of leaders, and it just gives me great pleasure to share the Nuffield story and, as I say, to showcase Jim's contribution to that along the way. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy. G'day, Jim. Welcome to Profitable Farmer. Wonderful to have you with us. How are you?
Oh, I'm great, Jeremy. Fantastic, actually, and great to catch up with you personally. I've listened to your podcasts on a regular basis, and it's great to meet you face to face.
Absolutely, Jim. Thank you so much for your time. So perhaps just for context for all of us, would love just to hear where you grew up and how do you describe what your original connection to agriculture has been?
Okay, well, I'm a bit of a historian, so let's not go back to the 12th, 13th century. But yeah, look, my mum and dad raised a family of 8 in the Murrumbidgee Irrigation Area in the Whitton Griffith area, and in fact, I was born in Whitton. Dad served in the 2nd First Pioneers during the Second World War. In fact, we walked Kokoda with 2 of my sons, a brother, sister and a nephew in 2017, and his photo was actually on a plinth at Issaraba, so that was quite a special moment. But Dad came back from the war. Of course, in those days, not a lot of capital, very little capital, started share farming and educated 8 kids. And we as a family, we quite often reflect on that, and what a great we talk about mentors, but Mum and Dad, I think in terms of our family, we all regard them as just wonderful mentors. The fact of what they were able to achieve to educate 8 of us under very trying conditions, and we realised probably in later life just how trying they were. So Dad share farm, rice farmer basically, was share farming 3 properties at one stage. Was fortunate through the closer settlement scheme with where soldier settlers obviously got a preference. Finally drew a block at Whitton in the Cuba breakup. He'd applied for the Colliambly farms a number of times, missed out, but finally drew one there in 1961. and we moved and lived on that farm from 1966 on. So rice farming, traditional, fat lambs, bit of wheat, but really fat lamb rice production. And Dad was imbued with a Protestant work ethic, which I think he's probably, most of our family have been thankfully blessed with that. And Mum, her background was, her father was a butcher in Leeton. She was one of 7 as well. So always good, strong family connections. And I grew up, was educated at Yanko Agricultural High School. So again, when I look at that and think about the cost of actually putting 4 boys, 4 girls in the family, 4 boys through boarding school was quite momentous. So that's where I sort of had my early grounding in agriculture and sort of grew up on a farm, helped that out whenever possible.
And Jim, I understand a significant portion of your career was with Cedenco in and around Echuca and in the tomato industry. Would you mind just speaking to that?
That's a long history, but Cedenco is actually the how you pronounce that. It's now called Kagome. It's a business was purchased by a Japanese company, but that was in the mid-1990s, I think, and it's really interesting, actually. So I actually did my scholarship in Nuffield Scholarship in 1986. So had grown up, left school, went to an ag college, 1-year ag college at what's now called Murrumbidgee College. And from there, I was very fortunate in that I spent 2 years in Thailand as a farm management supervisor, which was fantastic. I grew up in Thailand, had my 21st birthday in Thailand. So I was it was a project that was a Colombo Plan project that was overseen by the CSIRO. I was 20 years of age when I went there. Extraordinary when you think about it now. And they obviously needed someone yesterday and someone who was single and could get away at a drop of a hat. And ended up spending 2 years there. 4 other Australian farming families, not farming family, but 2 other scientists. There was an agronomist, a soil physicist, and a soil chemist, and myself. And the idea was that at this research station in Thailand, they were doing quite a bit of research on crops to grow other than rice during the dry season. So they'd set up a project area, and they needed someone to actually oversee and apply those research results that have been developed on this research station at farm level. So I got to deal with 38 farmers at a little village called Por Nung Dum. And as I said, it was just wonderful, wonderful experience for a young chap that went to all the weddings, the inductions of the men and the monkhood, became a part of the village, I suppose, the community to some extent. So I had a wonderful time there, came back home, I'd saved some money, and not long after that, I think about 6 or 8 months after that, I was able to purchase my own farm with the assistance from my father. And, so continued to farm from there. But the tomato story sort of didn't start until about nearly after my Nuffield Scholarship in 1986. Helen and I were married in 1976. And actually our 48th wedding anniversary next week. So she's been a wonderful partner for me. And I think when we talk about people, I talked about my mother and father. We talk about mentors, I suppose, and they're really not the true definition of a mentor. But I think about my mother and father quite a bit, and I just think of the impact they had on me. But my wife has actually had an extraordinary impact on me too, and you don't realise at the time, but she's had a significant impact on me, and in fact, I'm quite sure has definitely changed my outlook on the way I approach people, and she's just a wonderful person. So I see her as an absolute, as a mentor to me as well. So any credit due to me, whether it be Nuffield or whatever, I think must be shared equally with my wonderful wife. She'll hopefully drop in a bit later, and we might give her a bit of a surprise, Jeremy. But this is all sort of leading up to the Cedenco. So I sort of, was a traditional rice grower. Helen and I married in 76. We purchased another farm. So we had adjoining farms, rice farms. And I got into vegetable production, onions and tomatoes. Well, first of all, row cropping. So we were growing corn and soybeans and such like, got into vegetable production and particularly tomatoes. Cedenco was a New Zealand company. And it's interesting when I reflect upon my involvement with them, but certainly they arrived in Australia in, I think it was about 91, 92, 93, early 90s anyhow. And they'd set up a factory, these two farmers in Gisborne in the east coast of New Zealand, and had been supplying Watties in New Zealand out in Hawke's Bay. Had a big harvest one year. Watties couldn't take them all, so they decided they'd think about processing themselves. They did successfully. Put a small plant in and then expanded that plant. Most of their customers were in Australia, so they decided that what they should do is replicate it in the plant in Australia. I met them in the second year when they came to the mainland. They actually came over here looking at where the best place to grow tomatoes was. They started up in Trangie, got washed out the first year, came to the MIA. Second year, grew them with a good friend of mine, Bruce Gary Smith, Darlington Point. He wasn't interested in pursuing the partnership with them. I felt they fitted well with me and had a conversation, and we got into bed together, joint venture, and we grew tomatoes then in that area for a few years. They then moved the factory actually from Gisborne over to Australia in the mid-90s. And this was a part of the rationalisation of the Australian processing tomato industry. And to think that I've actually over that probably the next 20 years was very, very much involved in that rationalisation. And it's no different to a lot of other industries in Australia that I think have been rationalised. What happened, there was a chap in California who, going to UC Davis, and in his summer holidays, used to go out and drive the trucks for the tomato factories. So all of the big multinational, Heinz, Unilever, General Foods, etc., all had their own processing plants, obviously doing the primary processing, that is contracting with growers, taking that tomato, processing it into a paste. So in fact, actually evaporating the water, and then a bit further down the line, during the next 12 months, they'd take that evaporated tomato paste, which would go in at about, let's call solids, 5% solids, the tomato itself. They'd enhance that up to about 30% solids, so still 70% water. And then they'd put it back into their finished products, into tomato sauce, ketchup, etc., which might be 8 or 10% solids. So really what they're doing, taking water out, then putting it back in again a bit later down the line. But this chap, very much an entrepreneur, basically went to Heinz and et al. And said, listen, I can do this a lot better than you guys can. And ultimately what that meant was that they exited out of that, those big multinational exited out of the primary processing. And Dean Witters, who was one of the partners, him and his brother Cedric, who started Cedenco, Dean was very much aware of what was Chris Rufo, this chap, was doing in the US. And basically Cedenco, emulated that model. So they went to the big manufacturers in Australia and said, look, rather than you contracting growers and then doing the primary processing itself, we'll do that for you and supply you with a tomato paste. So for that, all that infrastructure and asset base that you've got sitting there for 3 months a year, you can forget about that. Concentrate on what you do best, and that's doing the secondary processing and obviously the marketing of the product. You had all the brands, obviously. So that's, in fact, that's when I turned up, when I got involved with Cedenco. They came to Australia and were looking at doing that. So the plant, for one reason or another, which is the time for another 2-hour podcast, eventually ended up in Echuca. We'd been growing, Cedenco and ourselves, growing together for a number of years. So we came down to Echuca, set it up next door to a Simplot, which was a processing plant. And then over time, as you can see, over the next 10 to 15 years, probably I'm not quite sure of the numbers in the mid-90s when Cedenco arrived, but there were probably 12 to 15 processing plants in Australia. There's now 2 left. That's the Cedenco, now owned by Kagome. And, of course, SPC in Shepparton. So the only 2 processing plants left. So that was the significant rationalisation of the processing industry. But of course, hand in hand with that went a rationalisation of the growing industry. And I think when I got into the industry in '88, there was about 175 growers growing about 175,000 tonnes. So, an average of 1,000 tonne per grower. Some were growing, 5,000, some 200 or 300, 500. A lot of it still manually picked, although machine harvesting had arrived in the country at that stage. But still, flood irrigation, basically, or furrow irrigation, relatively low yields relative to California, which was the benchmark. And when I exited the industry, our family exited the industry 4 or 5 years ago, and I think now, and I stand to be correct on the numbers, but there's, I think, 2 multinationals, one of which is Kagome, and probably half a dozen growers left in the industry. So significant rationalisation.
So, Jim, how long were you with Cedenco, and what does that business look like today?
Well, Cedenco went through a couple of iterations. So they came to Australia as a farming company, still farming in New Zealand, in Gisborne, and processing. So farmers who were processing. The first iteration of the factory in Australia was actually a joint venture between Cerebos Foods and Cedenco, although they were sitting next to the Simpot plant, and there's a backstory to that, but that's for another day. But so that wasn't a happy marriage. 2 different cultures, a farming culture going to, involved in processing, and if you like, a multinational corporate style culture dealing with primary processing and farmers directly. So although they did have a bit of a background, they had a factory at Parkes that they obviously closed down when they joint ventured with Cedenco here. That marriage eventually was annulled, and an American processor, of course, Scott Saylor from SK Foods, actually became the joint venture partner and ultimately bought out the rest of the holdings of Cedenco. And SK Foods ran the business for a number of years in New Zealand and Australia. Unfortunately, there were some issues in the US, which ultimately led to the plant here going into administration. And it wasn't because of financial issues. It was certainly because of issues back in the States, and the bank that was obviously underwriting the debt from this factory got a bit nervous, put into administration. The administrators took over, and within 12 months had sold the plant to Kagome, which is now a Japanese multinational. They've moved away from the, if you like, the first iteration, and certainly the first iteration, which was about processing for 90 days, 100 days. So you start the plant up, process for 100 days, shut it down, and then for the rest of the year you do your R&M and start it up and run it for another 100 days. There was a little bit of extra apple and pear processing, but ultimately you look at the plant now and there's quite a bit of processing for food service happening there now. So they're running the plant almost 12 months a year, which is a little bit different from the original model. So that's what it looks like now. They process quite a few carrots, carrot juice for the Japanese market, beetroot, obviously doing apples and pears, and obviously still doing tomatoes as well. But that's the as it stands at this particular point in time.
So, Jim, for those of us that have heard of but don't know exactly what Nuffield does, can you just describe Nuffield today, just in a nutshell, for people who have heard of it but might not know much about how it works practically?
Well, perhaps a little bit of an explanation about the program itself. I think each country has their own take on it, but fundamentally in Australia, and I think probably the majority of the countries, to be quite honest, including Nuffield International, there's three components. So there's what we call the Contemporary Scholars Conference. So after a scholar's been selected, we might talk about the pre-selection stuff before, a bit later, but so once the scholar's been selected, there is this Contemporary Scholars Conference. We've been looking for a better word for that for the last 20 years, but no one's come up with anything better yet. So in 2006, in fact, and Brendan Smart, again, another Nuffield Australia scholar, Brendan, he was instrumental in fact, I think, seeing the opportunity for bringing all of the scholars that have been selected around the world together. And he was a key driver in making that happen in 2006, which was, in fact, my first CSC in the Netherlands. So that year, in 2006, as I said, the 6 participating countries joined together in the Netherlands. And I'll never forget being there, and in that first morning, we were introducing everyone around the table. Everyone was introducing themselves, I should say. We had a break for coffee, and John Stones, the director of the UK program, we walked over in the corner and we had a cup of coffee each, and we looked at one another, and the noise, the crescendo of noise that was occurring when all of these scholars who had been a little bit standoffish in the past, all the Kiwis in this corner, the Aussies there, the Poms over there. There's this incredible, vibrant noise. And we looked at one another and we said, we think we've got a winner here. And there's no doubt that that's just been an absolute linchpin of the program. So now, for example, I think we had, about 40 scholars at that first one. I think Jodie Redcliffe, the current Nuffield International Secretary, CEO, she would have been looking after over 100 Nuffield scholars in Brazil earlier this year. So that gives you the idea of how much that's grown. So that's a key component. I think every country participates there. Then the second part of the Australian program is, so that's, if you like, the large group experience. And that's an opportunity for everyone to get to know one another, talk about, a lot of them will be, not a lot of them, some will be studying similar topics. So the opportunity to get together and chew the fat, learn a bit about each other's countries, start developing their travel programs. The second part of the Australian program, and New Zealand, Ireland, Netherlands, Nuffield International, they're the countries that are not, the USA, Nuffield USA, and Nuffield Brazil, I think, as well. They then do a compulsory global focus program, GFP. And this is 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. I think we cut it back, just after COVID for a period of time. I'm not quite sure what it'll end up being. It used to be 6 weeks in my time, but obviously costs, etc., they've shortened that a little. But that was a 3-continent, 6-country tour. Really was intense. But the idea was to give, there were some commonalities in all of it. Everyone went to Washington, D.C., tried to get to, if not Brussels, certainly a European country, to learn a bit about those two huge trading blocks, the USA and obviously the European community. But then got to go to a Southeast Asian country, hopefully a South American country, African country, Middle Eastern. So countries like, Chile, Brazil, Argentina, Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa at times, and obviously Israel at times, not at the moment. Georgia in the Caucasus, India, obviously, China. So trying to give those scholars a very, very quick global view, and I think it really does. I think it puts everyone's head in a spin. Most people would return home after those Contemporary Scholars Conference and Global Focus Program, I think, collect their thoughts. And then the third part of the program is their personal study. So every scholar does that. So that's a roughly 8 to 10 weeks. And they pre-selected a topic of their choice, which they then head out and at their own volition, and they do their own thing. They travel the world, and hopefully they've done enough background information that they've been able to really capture this Nuffield network, which would assist them on the way through. That's it in a nutshell. And of course, then write a report, the dreaded report on the return home. And then I think it's worth mentioning at this stage, and we'll probably talk about it a bit later as well, but reciprocity is a key word in Nuffield, so that the idea is hopefully if we've selected the right Nuffield scholar, the right person to be a scholar, reciprocity is a part of their makeup. You know, they're the person who have been down, you know, they're involved in the community when they're selected, you know, the president of the footy club, the netball club, their school P&C, etc., very much involved in the community, because when they come back, our expectation is, if not immediately, certainly over time, they will get engaged with Nuffield and continue to support the organisation in one way or another.
It's just such interesting insight. Jim, you've had a significant impact on Nuffield Australia and Nuffield International, which we can speak about. But what is it that makes Nuffield special, in your opinion? And what impact do you see it having on our industry?
Well, the first question last is, and it's pretty simple, I think, significant impact on agriculture. And I think it's demonstrated that, I think, particularly in the last 20 to 30 years. And again, we'll go to the first part. I might get you to ask me to remind me about the first part of the question again. But I think it's interesting to reflect upon the history of Nuffield in Australia, particularly. So I started here in 1950. First scholars were selected in 1950. And, of course, anyone that knows was about in the 60s and 70s would remember the modest farmer and the modest member. So Bert Kelly, and Bert was a Nuffield scholar, and he was one of our first Nuffield scholars. He was our first Nuffield scholar. But so between 1951, when Bert travelled, and the early mid-90s, we were selecting 2 scholars a year. So we'd select one from New South Wales and one from Queensland, and those 2 scholars would travel to the UK. The following year we'd travel, Victoria and Tasmania, and they would travel to the UK. And the following year, Western Australia, South Australia, and the Northern Territory. And then it'd be New South Wales and Queensland turn again. So it effectively meant only every 3 years, a young aspiring agriculturalist only got the opportunity to put his or her hand up to actually travel overseas. So by the early 1990s, we were hardly a self-replacing flock. We were starting to die out quicker than we were replacing ourselves. We're very, very fortunate. I think this is one of the great legacies that Nuffield has, is that we've been blessed with so much wonderful leadership. We really have. I think without question, I've known personally every Nuffield chairman since we actually started running our own show in the early 70s. We were run out of the UK until the early 70s. George Wilson was our first chairman. But all of those chairmen have been wonderful leaders. They have been visionary, and they really have, step by step, grown the organisation. But there's been, I think, in my mind, 2 significant step-ups over our history. In the mid-90s, Harry Perkins took on the chairmanship of Nuffield Australia. Now, Harry, if no one knows who Harry is, he was then the chairman of Wesfarmers, and I'd suggest that along with Michael Chaney, took Wesfarmers from that, I suppose, relatively small Western Australian cooperative to the conglomerate that is today. Harry always used to say, he said, if it wasn't for a Nuffield Scholarship, I'd still be farming at Bruce Rock. And if anyone has been to Bruce Rock, they'll understand the significance of that comment. But Harry was an Eastern Wheat Belt grain farmer, was fortunate to win a Nuffield Scholarship, and ultimately ended up chairing Nuffield Australia. He could see it was quite. We probably weren't having the significant. We weren't imposing, I think, any influence upon Australian agriculture simply through lack of numbers. There's a pretty simple equation from his perspective. What he was able to do was to engage 2 prominent Australians, rural journalist, Neil Inall, that I'm not quite sure if you know Neil, but Neil's a very, very good friend of mine, and Neil won't mind me telling this story. So I think Neil's comments were, and I might be paraphrasing it, but he said, very, very good project, but really no commercial value. But, of course, Barter Enterprises went on to be, I think, the second largest chicken producer in Australia. So he always tells that story himself. So, so Neil has had a distinguished record in agricultural journalism in Australia. And along with Dr. Jeff Miller, along with Dr. John Kerrin, who had been the Prime Minister for Agriculture, had set up the research and development corporations that have served this country so well, I think, over the last 30 years. Must be nearly 30-year history now. So he was the Secretary of Agriculture, Jeff Miller, at that point in time, under John Kerrin. Had retired, obviously, and gone off and done things with the World Bank and overseas. But Harry cobbled both of those together and said, well, listen, I want you to sit down and do a strategic review of Nuffield. Have a look at Nuffield. And probably in Harry's inimitable way, he knew what the answer was. He was getting the right people to write the story. I call it my Bible, that review I've got over in my bookshelf. And they came up with it. And look, there was a number of recommendations, but the guts of the review was that, look, if you wanted to really have an impact on Australian agriculture, you have to get some more numbers on the ground. And we were fortunate that through Jeff's influence, GRDC came on board and funded scholarships. Rural Industry Research and Development Corporation, now AgriFutures, put some seed money in to employ a full-time CEO. That was in the year 2000. And that really was, if you like, the springboard of Nuffield then being able to, if you like, offer scholarships far, far beyond what it had been offering in the past. So I see that as a significant event, absolutely significant event in Nuffield and Harry's leadership. Unfortunately, he passed away not long after we'd actually put the organisation on a very solid footing. And probably whenever I reflect upon his contribution to Nuffield, I think about he'd be pretty proud of where the organisation is today, and very, very much sits where his vision was for the organisation.
Jim, you mentioned that there were two major steps that Nuffield took. Harry inspired one of them. What was the second one?
Well, I think the second one is to do with Nuffield International. And I think that, so if you think about this organisation, it's a global organisation, but in 2008, I'd been managing that Nuffield program in Australia for 3 years at that point in time. There was Nuffield since 1980 this is Nuffield internationally, had been getting together every 3 years, what we call a triennial conference. And in 2008, it was held in Ireland, both the Republic and Northern Ireland. And at Kilkenny, there was a closing conference, and Australia was nominated to be the host for the 2011 triennial conference. And Peter Nixon, Nuffield scholar from 1990 from Western Australia, was selected as the chairman. Previously, the secretarial role for Nuffield International was handled out of the UK. It wasn't a very onerous task at all. Just a matter of probably organising a conference every 3 years. That was about all it was. Well, not all even organising it. The host country organised it, but just really writing some minutes up every 3 years. Peter took on the role of chairman, but insisted that his secretarial support, should come from Australia. That just so happened to be me. So between Peter and certainly Peter's vision, his extraordinary intellectual capacity, his vision, strategic thinking, he saw the opportunity to grow Nuffield from the 6 countries that were then a part of the organisation. So we had the UK, founding member, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, all founding members. So, and then in the mid-80s, France had come on board, and in mid-90s, Ireland. So we actually had 6 participating countries. Zimbabwe obviously had been a starting country as Rhodesia, but for obvious reasons it dropped out a couple of times through UDI and then certainly post-2000. But so 6 participating countries. He saw the opportunity to be much, much greater than that. And in fact, I was reflecting on it the other night and reading a document that he put together in January 2009, and he, in 2 pages, really laid out the vision for Nuffield International. And I think if you look at where we are now and look at that paper that he wrote, it is just, he could see 10, 20 years in advance of where all the rest of us couldn't. And very much like Harry. And Peter's, I think Peter's influence upon Nuffield International is largely misunderstood. I think he's basically seen as just being another chairman, but he took Nuffield that next step change, which is an extraordinary step change. And now we've got, I'm not quite sure actually, but I think there's about 12 or 13 Nuffield countries, and much due to Peter's good work.
So, Jim, what is it that makes Nuffield as a community so special, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's a network, and it's I think the great spread of people across it. I mean, I think Australia had more female scholars than male scholars, so we're getting this diversity, I think, in all aspects, both in the types of industry, where people sit in the industry, and obviously, the male-female ratio is probably close to 50-50. When I travelled, I think it was in the early 1990s before we select our first female scholar. We were very much male-dominated, but now the diversity in the organisation, and if you think about the countries that we have on board, and we even invite special people that come in from other countries to the Contemporary Scholars Conference. So we've had, although we haven't got scholars from India and China, hopefully one day we will, we've had people from those countries who attend that week-long conference, and again, they've become a part of that Nuffield family, that Nuffield network. So I think that, in essence, what makes it so special, Jeremy.
What do you reflect on that you're most proud of about your time as CEO of Nuffield Australia and also chair of Nuffield International?
Well, not chair, don't forget, not chair of Nuffield International, CEO of Nuffield International.
Sorry,
so
my apologies.
That's quite right. But, well, I think it was an experience I had once back in 2007-8, I think, that encapsulates what makes me so proud. I can remember, we actually had so what we used to do in those days is that we would have an autumn tour or a spring tour, and the returning scholars would make their presentations, and the departing scholars who were about to head off the next year. So these returning scholars had sort of been scholars 2 years previously, so they'd actually had 2 years in the program. But so we actually had these, there might have been a dozen new scholars standing up at the podium in a couple of minutes trying to basically, I suppose, talk about what they were going to study, where they're from, etc., who they were. And at the back of the room were 2 young scholars that had just returned, and they were digging one another in the ribs, and they're saying, "Look at those naive young people up there, And I tell them, I said, I could just see you 2 guys up there 2 years ago. And when I reflect upon the growth in those 2 individuals, and we see it with every person, the growth over those 2 years, the confidence that's actually built up, their capacity, and I always talk about Nuffield as a capacity building program. That's the most pleasing aspect for me, that we've selected people who have the potential to grow, and I think that we give them the opportunity to grow, and they grow into that space, and I hate to mention names, but I was listening to the current Victorian Farmers Federation chairperson today, Emma Germano, and she is an extraordinary young woman, courageous, strategic, and what she's trying to do with the VFF, I think, is a forerunner of where advocacy in Australian ag has got to go. I wouldn't want to put words in Emma's mouth, but I'm quite sure her Nuffield experience was significant for her and where she is today.
Thanks, Jim. So looping right back, what prompted you to apply for a Nuffield back, I think, in 1986? What was it that motivated you to lean into this organisation?
Well, 1985 we applied. I travelled in 86, so it was a good question, actually. I reflect upon that. I'm not quite sure. I saw the advertisement for it, I think, in the Land, and thought that'd be interesting. With my experience in Thailand, I think, I had a love for travel, and I perhaps hadn't travelled a hell of a lot outside Australia, other than when I was in Thailand. I was fortunate enough to travel to Japan and Malaysia and Papua New Guinea. But so it's a bit like asking someone who actually enlisted in World War One, why did they enlist? I think for many and varied reasons, but I really did want to, I think, expand my knowledge. It without really knowing the importance of the network and what that really meant.
Thanks, Jim.
I just wanted to just maybe another comment. I think that we talk about, Jeremy, reciprocity and giving back as being a very, very important aspect and a key parameter for selecting a Nuffield scholar. I think a huge amount of credit's got to be given to our investors. And this is, it's not going to be a plug for any particular investor, but I wanted to raise that because I deliberately call them investors. And I think it's a word, I think, that resonates with people you talk to. I can remember Ian McIntosh, who was our chairman during that, after we decided to start to expand, he was chairman then. And Ian talking at the Royal Ag Society about the need to expand the organisation, he talked about we should stop talking about sponsors. We should start talking about investors, because the people who give financial and other sort of support to our organisation, they're investing in agriculture. And it's a really important point. And I wanted to make that point today that these people who do give of their financial support are investing in capacity building in Australian agriculture.
Thanks, Jim. So what would you say to a young, enthusiastic farmer or agriculturalist thinking about applying to Nuffield for a scholarship? What would be your advice to them?
Well, I think when people look at a Nuffield scholarship, I think it all looks a bit too hard. They say, we haven't got time. I've got a mortgage I can't jump over. We have a young family. I've just gone through this expansion phase. All of the excuses of not to go. And I can remember Max saying to someone one day, he said, if you went and broke both your legs in an accident somewhere, you'd be laid up for 6 months. Well, just think about that. Who's going to go out and do the farm work, et cetera, et cetera? So I think what you've got to see Nuffield as a part of your growth, or as an investment, I should say, an investment in growing your capacity to run a better agricultural business. It will open up a network of people that will assist you. I think it'll reaffirm, hopefully, some of the direction you think you should be heading in, and certainly the post-Nuffield years. A lot of people make the mistake of not trying to capture that network and utilise it. Some people do it better than others. But to anyone who does apply, does win it, and does travel on a scholarship, make sure that you actually do that. Make sure you capture and utilise that network.
Jim, Nuffield International's mission statement, and I hope I've got this right, is to inspire people to make a difference in the world of agriculture. Would you mind just giving us one or two examples of scholars that you see now making a significance on the global stage?
Yes, I can certainly do that. So the Committee for Food Security meets every year and has been for 20, 30 years. And there was a young English scholar, and she'd been working for an organisation called Emerging Ag, who had been managing the private sector at the Committee for Food Security. And one of our Nuffield scholars, who calls himself a simple fisherman, he actually met her, I think, in Rome, or might have been in Rome, I'm not quite sure where, but she actually encouraged him to attend this Committee for Food Security and introduced him to Robin Anderson, who actually owns and manages and runs the Emerging Ag. He attended that in, I think, 2011, 2012. That's a Committee for Food Security. And I remember him telling me, he said, I was sitting in the foyer at the end of the week-long conference, and you can imagine what it was like, this talk fest. FAO headquarters like a rabbit warren, and all of the technocrats and the civil society and all talking about agriculture. He realised that all of the attendees there, which I don't know, more than 1,000, he was the actually only practising, if you like, primary producer there. And he was sitting in the lobby, and Robin Anderson came up to him and said, well, Wayne, what did you think about this, the CFS, the week? So, it was interesting. He said, don't think I want to come back again. Her comment to him was that you've got to be in the room, Wayne. You've got to be in the room. And he took that on board, and I think it's a very, very strong message for anyone in advocacy, that you need to be in the room. But to Wayne's credit, Wayne Dredge, this simple fisherman from Lakes Entrance, he returned the following year. I went along with him. I think we could both see the opportunity for not all Nuffield scholars, but certainly a number. And so for the next couple of years, we actually invited offered up Nuffield scholars too, and we actually assisted them to attend the CFS. And so I think that's still happening as far as I'm aware. But to my mind, we now have Nuffield scholars who are engaged in global policy advocacy, and very, very small way. But I think this is why where practicing farmers can actually have a say in the global world. So Wayne now actually, aside from fishing, actually works as an advisor to Emerging Ag. So to my mind, is having a significant, and his legacy, I think, in 10, 20, 30 years will be very, very significant, very significant. And of course, because I listened to Emma today, I think she's an extraordinary young individual as well, and I think she will make a significant difference as well. So they're two outstanding ones, but I hate mentioning people because every Nuffield scholar, in one way or another, makes a contribution to agriculture. And we talk about the imposter syndrome, where when you walk into that contemporary scholars conference with 100 Nuffield scholars from all around the world, and you're thinking you're from Bruce Rock in Eastern Wheatbelt of Western Australia, then what in the hell am I doing here? But you're in the room, and I think then it's incumbent upon you to do something about it, as those two individuals are, and nearly all of them are at some time or another.
Jim, we talked about having mentors before. What is it to be a mentor? I can only imagine, and I won't speak for the network of Nuffield scholars that have been lucky enough to know you and be supported by you, but what is it to be a mentor, and how is it that you try and turn up to some of these more modern day Nuffield scholars and offer your support and your advice to them over time?
Well, I don't think there's anything specific. In fact, Helen and I hosted a young Irish 2024 Irish scholar here about a month ago. We quite often are a bit of a halfway house for younger Nuffield scholars, and more than happy to assist them with the network, that we have out there. Because we had another example, I think, is that we had a young Nuffield scholar from Western Australia, 2024 scholar again, who contacted me wanting to better understanding about how to deal with mineral exploration companies. And so I was able to put her in direct contact with people in Canada, US, Azerbaijan, would you believe? And I'm just trying to think of another country as well, people who are actually involved in writing contracts for those mineral companies, which would give her first-hand knowledge of what was happening in those other countries. So I think I don't think there's any specific mentoringship that's happening, but I think that's a great pleasure I get out of being able to assist them in that way in many, many different ways, whether we host them, put them in contact with various people. So that's the sort of network and if you like, I'm not quite sure if that answers the question, Jeremy, but that's the sort of, I think, what I can offer post my Nuffield days.
Thank you, Jim. So more than almost anyone, you've travelled extensively and been connected globally through Nuffield and at the forefront of agriculture. What's your outlook on Australian agriculture and our position on the global stage?
Well, I don't suppose we're ever going to be significant on the global stage, but because we are an exporting country, fundamentally an exporting country, we have to be internationally competitive. We talk a lot about the demise of the family farm. I think there's no doubt the numbers show that. And the previous example I gave about the tomato industry, 175 growers back to half a dozen in 30-odd years. That's the rationalisation that's occurring in agriculture. But the reality is we're producing more with fewer now because we're a hell of a lot smarter. And I think the Farm Owners Academy is a part of that. I was listening to one of your podcasts earlier this week, and it's extraordinary. I think about 30 years ago, we had discussion groups. I came back from my Nuffield Scholarship and instigated a discussion group in our area. That was handy, but I think the expertise that you bring to a farmer's office in this day and age is extraordinary. And I think although we talk, in some sense, that's the corporatisation of agriculture. But again, I think you can still retain that family farming partnership with that sort of expertise that you're offering. So there'll continue to be the rationalisation. I think in the milk industry, we're seeing a similar thing that happened in the tomato industry, where some of the big multinationals will be exiting out of primary stage processing, and you'll have maybe it's venture capitalists doing the primary processing and on-selling the processed product into those people, big companies that have the brands. Good, well-educated farmers, I think, there's still an enormous place for them, and there's got to be great positivity out there, albeit, I think, always with seasonal issues, always playing around the edges. That's the unfortunate part about it, but we're a pretty resilient mob.
I agree, Jim. I've got two questions for you that I ask everyone or most people that I interview. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
The key to management is timeliness and attention to detail.
The key to management is timeliness and attention to detail. Thanks, Jim. And what would you say to a younger you? What would you say to a 22-year-old Jim Geltch coming through?
Oh, go and join Farm Owners Academy. And I'm not blowing your own trumpet, but I can tell you, what you're offering. And I think what's on offer for young agriculturals these days is to grab things like the Nuffield Scholarship and grow your capacity, things like the organisation that you're involved in, to grab those sort of opportunities and run with them and look beyond the farm gate. You've And it's a well-worn cliche, but learn to manage your business, from outside, from a mezzanine perspective, not in your business. You got to be outside your business, I think, to manage it much better than certainly I did.
Jim, I think you said it well before. Well, you've got to think about investing in your own development, and I think Nuffield allows leaders in our industry to do that on a global stage, and hopefully in some small way Farm Owners Academy supports that same cause. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I think my hope in this conversation was to pay Nuffield, or to tribute Nuffield for the incredible work that organisation does and the impact it has both on Australian agriculture and overseas. And it's been wonderful to acknowledge you and your contribution and your career in and around Nuffield for, I think, over 38 years or more, Jim.
Thanks.
So thanks for your time and congratulations.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I just hope that, although I haven't, I'd like to acknowledge every Nuffield scholar that went through the program under my watch. I mean, I always treated everyone the same, and they all add something to Australian agriculture in one way or another. So thanks for the opportunity, Jeremy. Thank you very, very much.
And thanks so much for your time, Jim.
Cheers now.
And so there you have it, an incredible interview with an incredible leader and contributor to agriculture. Well done, Jim, and thank you so much for your time. Now, in Jim's very active retirement, he still plays cricket and has toured with cricket globally as a real contributor. He is deeply passionate about health and well-being and living a long life, and still advocates for careers and for the next generation of leaders in agriculture, particularly with the old Yankonian Union or Foundation and the Careers for the Future program, where he and that organisation are creating links for our school leavers to find and pursue positive and compelling careers in agriculture. So, Jim, congratulations for the impact that you continue to make. And again, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your and the Nuffield story. Thanks, everyone. Take care and bye for now. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Profitable Farmer podcast by Farm Owners Academy. If you're new to this show, be sure to follow us. If you've been a long-time listener, let your friends know about us or come continue the conversation in the Profitable Farmer Facebook group. All the best as you grow your business and create your freedom farm. Until next time, keep being incredible.